report. Now we're going to begin the part where our main speakers come in. Before we begin, I just want to mention one thing. After the program, it's a representative from the Green Party is going to be here, looking for a signature so we can get the Green Party candidate on the ballot here for the upcoming presidential election. And just between you and me, if I could vote, I would vote for Green Party, and their position better represents what the position that I believe in. One of the main things they believe in is ending war on drugs, which to me has been America's longest war, the most devastating war, not just here in the communities that I live in, but also abroad. As I continue to question myself, how can it be that the United States military in Afghanistan for the past 10 years or more, is they're growing a record crop of poppy that they never had before, the U.S. military did. So I'm wondering what they're still doing, to protect the poppy so they continue to flourish, they continue to lock up people and destroy people with the peddling of it. The Bank of America got indicted for money laundering, drug money, and nobody went to jail. They just paid a fine. So with that being said, I'm going to bring up one of the founders of the Defenders to introduce tonight's speakers. His name is Bill Lalo, and give him a hand.
Second public defenders meeting where we used to meet in people's homes, and we haven't done a public forum in a long time, so we decided to meet in a more public place and invite friends and allies and potential friends and allies, and we really thank you all for coming out tonight. Wanted to mention, because Kwame is modest and may not, besides being a member of the Defenders, he is also a regional commissioner for the United Negro Improvement Association African Communities League, started by Marcus Garvey, and a regional representative for the November Coalition, which fights the war on drugs. In terms of Mali, we did produce an analysis and statement on Mali that we sent out over the internet shortly after the coup, and it's gotten some response. Anna has been interviewed this afternoon by the Los Angeles Pacific affiliate about the analysis, and also last week by the United Nations representative of the final call newspaper of the Nation of Islam. And both of those reporters said that, in their opinion, this analysis was the best thing that had come out on Mali. Anna will be following the issue and will, of course, be supporting her in that. Just wanted to mention that tonight we want to thank Christopher Maxwell from Homespun. I know it, Homespun C-SPAN, because I listen to on community radio station WRAR, and he's taking this program, which was broadcast and archived, and it gets around quite a bit, and we thank him for that. And also for David Martin, I'm sorry, who is also filming tonight's program. And if you don't know David, David is the People's videographer for Richmond. And if you stand still or move in the city of Richmond, David will eventually be there. So he has played a tremendous service to the progressive movement by documenting and publicizing events that they happen around the city. And we want to thank the Flying Brick Library tonight for, in addition to the other roles they're playing, for helping with security at tonight's meeting. I'm going to be very brief in the introductions, because if I were to tell you all of the things in the resumes of Ann Wright and Medea Benjamin, they would not get a chance to speak this evening. I told Ann that we thought we were going to have a little League game and wound up hosting a doubleheader of the World Series. So, and it's particularly important to us when we know that both of these figures who are internationally known peace activists, and who are capable of commanding large audiences and occasionally decent honorariums for their work, are coming here gratis, pro bono, to help our local movement. They spoke last night and the night before in Charlottesville, Virginia, and we'll be in Virginia Beach tomorrow. We really thank them for coming, and we are going to pass a hat after they speak. But thank them very much for coming out. Anne Wright was a active duty member of the U.S. Army for 16 years, and also spent 13 years in the U.S. Army Reserve. She spent a long time in the diplomatic corps and stationed in more than a dozen countries around the world. At one point received a Medal of Honor from the State Department for her heroic role in helping refugees in an internal conflict in Sierra Leone to escape to safety. She has put her own life online in her military service, and she has done the same thing ever since 2003, where the day before the U.S. invaded Iraq, she cabled Secretary of Defense Colin Powell and announced that she was resigning from the military and the diplomatic corps, resigning from the State Department over her opposition to the impending invasion of Iraq. Since then, Anne has distinguished herself by her writing, by her speaking, and by physically traveling around the world and putting herself in situations to stand in solidarity with those who are targeted by U.S. imperialism. Medea Benjamin is the same type of warrior woman who had a career as an economist and nutritionist with the United Nations, and then went on to become a human rights activist, co-founder of the International Human Rights Organization Global Exchange, which does people-to-people delegations around the world, and then a founder of Code Pink. You remember when under George Bush, the Jr., there was a series of codes that we were supposed to follow to see how dangerous the situation was in the world. I remember getting ready to take a cable car over to Roosevelt Island, New York City, and I saw that we had gone up to a red, and that we should be careful because Saddam Hussein might be attacking us. And I'm afraid of cable cars anyway. I was doing it as sort of an exercise, and I didn't appreciate it. But there was a code red and a code green and a code yellow. So Code Pink was established as a largely women's organization to fight against the war on terror. And Medea has also distinguished herself as a writer, as a speaker, and as a fearless solidarity activist in going to places around the world under U.S. pressure. Both Anne and Medea were arrested in Bahrain, standing with the people of Bahrain against their repressive government, which is backed by the United States because that government, I'm going too long on it, allows the Fifth Fleet to be stationed there. They have both traveled to Iran to get for themselves, see a picture of that targeted country, and they have particularly distinguished themselves in the fight to support the Palestinians and Palestinian right to self-determination, and were organizers of the Gaza Peace Flotilla #2, which attempted to break the Israeli blockade of Cuba, put their lives on the line for the solidarity that they feel for the oppressed peoples of the world. We are tremendously honored and pleased to have them here this evening. I'm not sure who was going to make the first presentation. Anne will make the first presentation, followed by Medea, and then we'll have questions and answers and discussion. Let's welcome.
Very much, Bill and Kwame. Thank you all. To all of you all who are members of the Defenders, and I love that name. Thank you all for inviting Medea and I both to be here tonight. It's great to be in Richmond, and it's great to hear the report backs from all of you all who are so active in your community and who are challenging the system, and as the system challenges you back, to stand up for what you believe in, and to have communities like are represented here to be in solidarity with those who are challenging things. And for the lady that's in jail, Ashley Williams, you know, give her our best. I mean, that's the abuses that our judicial system, our legal system is wreaking upon people is of great concern for all of us on every level, whether it's the individual level of that woman being accused of starving her child to death when in fact there's something else going on, but the state's covering that part of it up, to the women who've been standing up for the rights of women, and who have, I heard the stories of what happened to you all, you know, in the bus and all of that stuff. That's outrageous. If I could be here on the 23rd, I would. Just for all the things you've got coming up with the Peace Center, great, great opportunities for us to learn more about Iran and other places. For Anna's presentation of what's going on in West Africa and Mali. I mean, the reach that we have now in our communities, the people who are concerned, who have gone to places around the world and seen for themselves. And I want to certainly mention Phil and his excellent book that he's written about his trip to Iran several years ago and his leadership in getting Americans more familiar with what's going on and introducing them through opportunities to meet, the feared members of the government of Iran. I mean, my God, you'd think that we all would be running for cover for this, but no, Phil is there helping us to get to know people as human beings and to dispel the myths of these outrageous terms that government puts on nations that they want us to hate. And of course, old George Bush was he was quite the one when he just blanketed the three countries with the moniker of the axis of evil. And Iran, Iraq, North Korea. And then to see what the United States does to these countries after you first put a name like that on them. And then the American people will follow governments in vilifying those people. Well, thank goodness there are groups like this in every part of our country who say to our government, we really don't believe you. And I say that as a person who has been in our government most of her life. I was with the government for almost 40 years, a total of almost 30 years in the U.S. military, and then a lap over with the State Department, 16 years. And I'll just mention some of the countries I was in: Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Sierra Leone, Micronesia. I helped reopen the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan in December of 2001. Was there for about 5 months, and then went on to what turned out to be my final assignment as the Deputy Ambassador, the Deputy Chief of Mission of the U.S. Embassy in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. And it was while I was in Mongolia that the Bush administration started talking about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I had just come from that assignment in Afghanistan and went to Mongolia, and I was thinking, what are they talking about? We know what, well, there's at least a thread, an arguable thread between what happened on 9/11, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. The U.S. went in to go after Al-Qaeda, took out the Taliban, they thought at the time. But why are they focusing on Iraq? I mean, there's plenty of work to be done. I mean, in the good old U.S. government parlance of it. I mean, there were plenty of you all that were saying, wait a minute, we don't think the U.S. CIA or military should have gone into Afghanistan to start with, but there were better ways to handle problems. And then if you really look at how things have turned out, you were exactly right. There have been more people that have been accused of terrorist acts that have been wrapped up through international law enforcement, that have been captured and put before courts. Most of them convicted on what evidence, at least most of them have been in semi-open court, that at least the government was having to produce some evidence that some of it saw the light of day. But this issue of Iraq, turning to that, while all of this was going on in Afghanistan, that's what finally, after 40 years in government, I finally said I can't support what the Bush administration is doing. So I was one of 3 federal employees that resigned in opposition to the war in Iraq. Only 3. We all happened to be diplomats. We didn't know each other. We were serving in different parts of the world. But we independently came to the decision that we could not support the decision to invade and occupy an oil-rich Arab Muslim country that had not done anything to the United States, had nothing to do with 9/11. So 9 years ago, I left the government. And I've been so pleased that I've done that.
And so are we.
You're most kind, because one of the reasons is I think I would have had a tremendous case of ulcers, if not a heart attack or stroke, if I had stayed in the government and seen all the other things that were happening. But it's the opportunity to meet groups like you all over the country. Wonderful Americans who are really concerned about the destiny of our country, and we're trying very, very strongly to protect what really is the foundation of our country, the Constitution and the rights that we have, and the rights that are being assaulted by our own government. So, on one level, if I was in the government, by now I could have resigned at least every day I was in the government, it would be a time to resign for all the things that we've seen that's happened. I'll switch back now to Afghanistan, though, and mention that, today we've had President Obama right here in your fair city. Here he is opening up his campaign for re-election as President of the United States. And it's not the first time he's been in the news this week. He was in Afghanistan earlier this week, where he flew in cover of darkness to make the pronouncement that we will now have a 10-year strategic partnership with the Afghan government. And President Obama, who ran as a candidate 3 years ago, saying that Afghanistan was the good war. And he warned us as a candidate that he was going to increase the U.S. role in Afghanistan, which he certainly has done, by increasing the numbers of troops that we have there, by increasing the types of technology that's used, and Medea will be speaking about that later on, a specific kind of technology that has caused a lot of us a lot of concern. The Afghanistan, where even when I was there 10 years ago in January of 2002, things were happening there that we still are having the consequences of, and this week one of them comes up. That 10 years ago we were transporting men from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from all places around the world into that prison down in Cuba, Guantanamo, where we have had over 800 people, 800 prisoners in Guantanamo over the last 10 years. The Bush administration had a bounty program for the purchase of people anyone that could convince a CIA agent or a U.S. government employee that this person was either senior Taliban or Al-Qaeda, who would pay $5,000 for a Taliban, $25,000 for an Al-Qaeda, and that's how we filled up Guantanamo. Here it is 10 years later. Out of that 800, there's still 150 people that are in Guantanamo. The worst of the worst is what the Bush administration put the name on them. The worst of the worst, and we can't tell you how bad they are, because we would have to reveal the techniques that we've used under the Bush administration, the enhanced interrogation techniques that have gotten information from them that show us, the government, that they are the worst of the worst. Well, just this week, the Obama administration is using the military commissions, which Obama as a candidate said we're going to close Guantanamo. But there was such outrage by the Congress and specific communities in our nation who said we don't want those worst of the worst coming to our communities, that there are no federal prisons strong enough to withstand Al-Qaeda coming after these guys. So they're still rotting down in Guantanamo. In fact, Medea and I know exactly where they're rotting. As Phil was talking about the places that we've been, I must say I owe a great debt of gratitude to Medea Benjamin for showing me parts of the world that I never would have seen, because I wouldn't have had the nerve to organize a group of people to go to Guantanamo, to go to Cuba. This is under the Bush administration, to go to Cuba, to protest out that back gate of Guantanamo, the place that at that time had over 700 prisoners in it, and to invite along to go with us the mother and the brother of a man that was in the prison at the time, and also to invite along to go with us a young man who had been released from Guantanamo, one of the very first people released because the British government, who was saying, now wait a minute, show us the goods. Show us the evidence on all of the British citizens that you have in there. And as the United States, gradually showed them what little they had, the Brits said, you have no evidence. Release our citizens. And so one of the very first people that was released, Medea got in touch with and said, would you like to come to Cuba with us? We're going to go protest out at the back gate of Guantanamo. And I would have thought that a person like that would have said, are you kidding? I'm never going to set foot on that place in Cuba again. And instead, he and the producer of the film about his life called The Road to Guantanamo, the two of them came saying to Medea, I'm not afraid of the Cubans. I'm not afraid of going to Cuba. I'm afraid of you, the Americans that are in Cuba. I tell that story because today is the beginning of the court-martial of the man that the United States government says was the orchestrator of 9/11, the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed that was waterboarded 177 times, 87 times. An unbelievable number of times that he was almost suffocated to death. He had to think he was suffocating to death because that's the purpose of waterboarding. That's the purpose of the enhanced interrogation techniques, is to put such pressure on people that they talk. Well, he talked, and he apparently is in charge. He committed every crime that there has been committed in the history of our civilization. And that's what even the government says that. He admitted everything, every single thing, every single thing. But we know from our own real professionals in interrogation, the people who have gotten more information out using non-violent means to get information out of people are FBI. Now, I mean, they certainly have a sordid track record in a lot of other ways. I mean, all of this entrapment that they're doing now in our communities, and if every single day you look through a newspaper, you're going to see somebody else that's being charged with a conspiracy, challenging national, or not challenging, but some sort of threat to U.S. national security. And if you read in there, I'd say at least half of the arrests that are being made on terrorism charges now, it's because of the entrapment. That the FBI has paid one of its informants to go find somebody. Go find us somebody that will at least talk with you, and then maybe meet with you, and you bring all of the explosive devices, or you bring all of whatever it is we're going to charge this person with, and all they have to be is essentially standing there with you, and then we will charge them, and we will try them, and we will convict them. And that's what we're doing. But the FBI, to their credit, in the early days of 2002, were saying, you know, the interrogation techniques that are being used by the CIA are wrong. And in fact, the FBI pulled its agents out of Guantanamo because of what the CIA was doing to people there, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. So we have Guantanamo still in the news. We have the president's new 10-year plan for Afghanistan that we still don't know much about. We just know that it's a 10-year strategic partnership. It'll probably be, the president says we aren't going to have any permanent bases, but a 10-year period where we are going to have military people there. They're going to have to live someplace, and I would suspect that they're probably going to live on the basis where they're living right now. So I think you would probably call it permanent, at least 10 more years, so that would make 20 years that we're having people in Afghanistan. Yeah, well, that's probably true. We have, what else do we have? We've got whistleblowers. Whistleblowers that are telling about criminal acts being committed by people in our government. One of the ones that's being charged right now, well, there are 7 main ones, but one of the ones that maybe some of you all know about, because you may have gone up to Quantico to a protest we had a year ago. This is the young PFC, Private First Class U.S. Army soldier Bradley Manning, who is accused of being the leaker to WikiLeaks of a huge number of classified documents, both State Department documents and U.S. military documents. And the commentary is that Bradley Manning released all of this material to WikiLeaks because he had seen a video that had been taken by a helicopter in Iraq, a helicopter camera that was focusing on a situation that had developed in Iraq where the U.S. military had gone after some people that they were saying were a threat to U.S. military. And this helicopter is, how many of you have seen this film called Collateral Murder? Yeah. You saw what happened where this helicopter was standing off after they had already killed several of what they were calling the militants, and there was one that was left alive, still crawling along the sidewalk, and the helicopter was following this person crawling along, and when a van pulled up, and all of a sudden people started getting out of it. Two guys got out of it, and they rushed over to this person to do something, and then you could see from the camera, you could see that there were two little kids sitting in the front of the van, and yet you heard the audio going on with the helicopter pilot saying, describing the situation, then request permission to fire, and then a little lull time, and then finally permission to fire, and you saw the van blow up, and then we find out later that, gosh, our intelligence wasn't so good on this, that indeed the guy that was crawling along was a Reuters camera person who had already been injured severely by U.S. military gunfire, and then the two people in the van were his colleagues who saw him on the ground, wondered what happened, were going over to rush over to help him, and then they were killed too. And it was seeing that, and then the cover-up of that, and no action taken after he mentioned this to his superiors, that here is something that needs to be investigated. And so the allegations are that he was very disenchanted with the U.S. government, and he super-copied all of this unbelievable amount of information and gave it to WikiLeaks. Well, a year ago we were out front of Quantico, the Marine base, where he was being in pretrial confinement and protesting the conditions that he was under, where he was being stripped naked every day, where he was kept in solitary confinement. A lot of treatment that one would anticipate would be given to probably the people in Guantanamo, but it was our own soldiers here. So there were 40 of us that got arrested that day. 2 weeks later, the Army actually stepped in and took him out of a Marine Corps facility and put him in the U.S. Army pretrial facility out in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, which has reasonable facilities for those people who have never been convicted of anything. Well, Bradley Manning's pretrial hearings have been going on for the last couple of months. One of them was last week. I attended that. Every one of the motions of the defense attorney to challenge parts of the charges against PFC Manning have been denied. It looks like there will be 3 more pretrial hearings where more charges will be gone, say, as a person that's been in the military the whole time, and as equivalent rank as the judge in the court-martial or in the pretrial hearing, full colonel. If the colonel doesn't deny every one of those motions, the colonel will find himself out of a job and out of the military pretty quickly, I would say. Which doesn't speak much for the military justice system, but I think it speaks to the reality of what it's all about. So you have that whistleblower's case coming up. We now have 6 people who under the Obama administration have been charged with espionage for being whistleblowers. It's the first time since Daniel Ellsberg was charged with espionage for releasing the Pentagon Papers 40 years ago that those charges have come about. And these are charges based on, again, release of classified documents, but as the whistleblowers say in each one of those cases, these documents detail government malfeasance. Specific people in the government abusing their power, and the government employee who is now the whistleblower, now charged with espionage, saying, I'm a government employee. I know when things are being done wrong, and for the sake of the organization, I have to speak up. I've tried within the system to change it, and nobody's listening, and they take the dramatic step and a very dangerous step for them for speaking out publicly. And then the government goes after them for revealing classified information. So I would hope that everyone will look into your own minds, your own conscience about, what is right, and what do we as citizens do? Do we support our fellow citizens that are trying to make sure that the government is being honest with itself and with us? And it is hard when the government itself is charging people with something as, espionage. These are death penalty sorts of things. These are serious things. But it's also serious if we don't stand on people. So far I've not heard anything that I've seen that says that these people are spies, that they have purposely released information so that it will harm the interests of the United States. They're doing it because they want to preserve the interests of the United States. I'll just kind of close up because we've got so many different issues we could be talking about, and Medea's got a great presentation on drones that you will find fascinating. But I'll just end my part of this on the issue of Israel and Palestine. As Phil mentioned, both Medea and I have been very involved in highlighting the fight of Palestinians, primarily in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. But both she and I went to Gaza within days after the Israeli attack on Gaza in December of 2008 and January of 2009 that killed 1,440 Palestinians, wounded 5,000, left 50,000 homeless, and destroyed a huge amount of the infrastructure of that tiny little place. The Gaza Strip, 25 miles long, 5 miles wide, and one of the most densely populated places in the world, with now 1.7 million people living in that tiny little place. The Israelis suffered 13 people killed, 10 of them by friendly fire. They were killed by their own people shooting artillery that landed where Israeli soldiers were, things like that. After we saw what was going on there, and from a military perspective, having been in a lot of conflict areas, I had never seen that kind of destruction, that kind of intense bombardment, attacks that were just going on 24 hours a day in such a small, concentrated area. Certainly I was never in Vietnam, but I was in the military at the time, so I know that there were intense times there, but I've never seen anything in such a concentrated area. So Medea and I and Ty Berry got tickets, off we went to Cairo, and then tried to get into Gaza. And by some miracle, we were able to get in. We spent only 48 hours because the guards, border guards, and across the Egyptian border, as we went in, said they were going to close the border in 48 hours, and they didn't know when they were going to reopen it. So we went in, quickly looked at as much as we could, which was a lot of it, and brought back pictures and started making speaking trips all over the country to show people what we had seen. And then there was such interest in it that people wanted to go in solidarity with the people of Gaza. And over the next 6 months, there were 7 different trips that were organized by people who went on our first 2 trips. And then at the end of that year, of 2009, we organized what was called the Gaza Freedom March, where 1,350 people from, I think it was something like 40 countries, came to Cairo on their way into Gaza to be in solidarity on the commemoration of that first year of struggle of trying to rebuild and get their lives back together after the Israeli attack. And then the Egyptian authorities wouldn't let us go in, so we had all these people stuck. Ultimately, we got 2 busloads of people in. But the rest of the internationals from all of these countries who are used to challenging their own government, well, what do you think happened in Egypt when you have all these activists from all over the world who really are used to standing in the face, nose to nose with the police officers in their own country. And they go to Egypt and it's like, well, we don't care, it's Egypt, we'll just stand face to face with you. So we had standoffs with the Egyptian authorities for the next days. We had demonstrations in places that Egyptians could not have demonstrations. In fact, they couldn't meet in any larger groups than 6 people at a time. It was forbidden in Egypt. And we had all of these activists that were taking over the streets, that were protesting in front of the American embassy, the Israeli embassy. We had 300 Frenchmen that camped out in front of the French embassy. I mean, if you see the pictures of this group in Cairo in December of 2009, it really is a year later in 2010, in January of 2010. 2011, when the Arab Spring happened. It was like this was a precursor to that. And I'll just finish up with one more aspect of this challenge to the brutal Israeli treatment of Palestinians in the blockade around Gaza, the land and sea blockade, and the illegal settlements that are going on in the West Bank, and the apartheid wall that's been built around the West Bank. Another type of citizen activism challenging by going by boat to challenge the naval blockade of Gaza. I was on the 2010 Gaza Freedom Flotilla that was attacked by the Israeli Navy, by the commandos. And on each of the 6 ships were attacked, and on one of the ships, 9 people were killed, and including an American citizen, 8 Turkish citizens and 1 American citizen. Our U.S. government, neither the Bush administration nor the Obama administration, has investigated that, saying we leave it to Israel. The next year we had another flotilla, 10 ships, including 1 here from the United States. We fundraised all over the country and raised enough money that we purchased our own U.S. boat to Gaza. We were part of an international flotilla to break that blockade. That U.S. boat to Gaza was called the Audacity of Hope. Because we wanted to challenge this administration on its continuation of previous administration's policies that are really so destructive for the relationship between Israel and Palestine. That indeed the United States government continually backs the Israelis in whatever criminal acts the Israelis do on the Palestinians. Not that I condone at all rockets that are sent from Gaza into Israel. That's not, I don't condone that at all. And as most Palestinians, they wish the militant groups would stop that. But it is an opportunity we have. We furnish $2 billion for the Israeli military every single year, and that is leverage that we have on the Israeli government that neither the Obama administration nor previous administrations will use. So we have a lot of things on our plate. In fact, if you take the map that Anna so graciously gave us, you know, we've got things in West Africa, Mali, that we should be concerned about. We've got the Middle East, Egypt and Syria and Iraq. We've got Libya. We've got South Sudan now. We've got Yemen. We've got Afghanistan, Pakistan. There are a lot of things that we need to be asking all of these presidential candidates that we have to pin them down on what their policies and programs are going to be for these, because it is it's our tax money that is going to kill a lot of people around the world. And when you look at foreign policy issues and the debt policies of not just this administration, but virtually all administrations. I mean, we are, if you really look at it, we're a warmongering country. And in one way, no matter the Democrats or the Republicans are using this war for the profits that corporations get off of it. And my last little comment is all of those people that are doing work with Occupy, whatever it is, and challenging the corporate system, as well as speaking out for peace. I applaud all of you. And we are so thankful for being here. Thank you very much, Richmond.